"You're just an old mechanic. You'll embarrass me in front of my new boss. Sit somewhere else." That's what my son-in-law said to me at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, pointing me toward a small table by the kitchen doors. I was 72 years old. I'd put on my one good suit. Brett had told me this dinner mattered, that his new boss's company was involved, that having family there would look good. And I'd been glad to come, because my daughter would be there, and because, foolishly, some part of me was glad to be included at all. Then I arrived, and Brett looked at me in my good suit, and his face did that little tightening of distaste. He steered me away from the main table, where my daughter sat with his in-laws, toward a small table by the kitchen. "You're just an old mechanic," he said. "You'll embarrass me in front of my new boss. Sit somewhere else." My daughter Colette looked down at her plate. She didn't defend me. I understood why. Brett makes her life difficult when she crosses him, but it still went through me like a blade, watching my own girl study her napkins so she wouldn't have to meet my eyes. "That's all right, Brett," I said, and I went and sat at the little table by the kitchen, alone, and ordered a coffee. Just a coffee. I sat there in my good suit and watched my son-in-law across the room, laughing too loud, waiting for his important new boss. 5 minutes later, the boss walked in. And what happened next, I've replayed every day since, because he walked straight past Brett's outstretched hand, crossed the entire dining room, and stopped in front of me. His face was full of joy and disbelief. "Mr. Trelinsky," he said, loud enough for the whole silent room to hear. "My God. Sir, it is an honor." Then he walked back to Brett's table, set something down on the white tablecloth, said a few quiet sentences, and I watched my son-in-law's face go dead white. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who I am first, and who that boss turned out to be, and what I'd spent 45 years building that Brett never once bothered to ask about. It's better than a secret. My name is Amos Trelinsky. I'm 73 now. This happened last year. My son-in-law was right about one thing. I am a mechanic. These hands have been inside engines since I was 14. I never went to college, never wore a suit to work a day in my life. But here's what Brett never found out, because he decided who I was the moment he saw my hands. I'm not just any mechanic. I'm one of the finest engine builders this country has produced in 50 years. There's a point in any hard trade where the rules end and the feel begins. Anyone can follow a manual, but after 45 years and 10,000 engines, the knowledge lives in your hands, not your head. That's what I have. That's what those scarred hands Brett was ashamed of actually are. At 28, I started a company out of a two-bay garage. Over 45 years, it became one of the most respected specialty engine and precision manufacturing firms in the country. Aerospace, defense, high-end industrial work I'm not fully at liberty to discuss. There are aircraft flying right now with my company's work inside them. I own it outright. Never sold out, never went public. It employs over 600 people. In the industries that matter, the name Trelinsky is spoken with respect. And my son-in-law had no idea, because in all the years he'd been married to my daughter, he never once really asked what I did. He'd decided from my hands and my plain clothes that I was a simple old grease monkey, an embarrassment to manage at family functions. Men like Brett don't investigate people they've already decided are beneath them. My wife Junie would have loved this story. We were married 48 years before she passed 2 years ago. Her heart. She kept our books at the kitchen table for the first 15 years. She was the business half. I was the building half. She used to say, "Amos, someday somebody's going to underestimate you because of those hands, and I only hope I'm in the room to watch." She wasn't in the room, but I like to think she saw it anyway. She always said there were two kinds of people, those who ask what something costs, and those who ask what something is worth. And the trick of a good life was keeping the second kind close. She'd caught Brett's nature in one evening, washing dishes after meeting him. That one asks what things cost, Amos. Watch him. It took me years and a corner table to see what she saw over the dishes. My daughter Colette is 36, good and kind, and she married the wrong man. Brett was charming when they met. Men like him always are. By the time his real nature showed, they were married, and over the years he'd slowly made her small, made her doubt herself, made her afraid of his moods. I'd watched it from a distance, with an anger I kept swallowing, because every time I tried to say something, it made her life harder afterward, so I stayed quiet. I want to be clear, I never engineered a single bit of what happened at that restaurant. It happened entirely because of Brett's own mouth, aimed at the one person in the room he should have been kind to. Brett is 38, a climber, obsessed with status and titles, the kind of man who treats people above him like gods and people below him like furniture. He worked in business development for a firm in the defense and aerospace supply world, which matters enormously in about 2 minutes. He'd spent his whole marriage viewing me as a liability. He introduced me, when he had to, as Colette's dad. He's retired. Never what I actually did, because he assumed it was nothing worth mentioning. One Christmas still stings. Someone asked what I did for a living, and before I could answer, Brett laughed and said, "Oh, Amos tinkers with cars. Got a little shop. Basically retired. 600 employees. Aircraft flying with my work inside them. And my son-in-law introduced it as tinkering with cars." I ate it, for Colette's sake, and went home and talked to Junie's photograph about it, because she was the only one who'd have understood the size of what I was swallowing. So when Brett called about this dinner, a big promotion on the line, a new boss, family there to look grounded, I said yes. Because Colette would be there, and because some small, foolish, hopeful part of me thought maybe this was Brett finally warming up. I put on my good suit, the one I'd bought for Junie's funeral, and drove over. Brett saw me and his face fell. He steered me to the little table by the kitchen before I could reach the main table. "You're just an old mechanic," he said, low and sharp. "You'll embarrass me in front of my new boss. Sit here. Have a coffee. Don't make this weird." Colette saw. She looked down at her plate, and my heart broke a little, and I didn't blame her. "That's all right, Brett," I said, and sat down, and ordered my coffee, and waited. I want you to know what I actually felt sitting there, because it wasn't rage. I've earned enough respect from people who matter that one shallow young man's contempt couldn't touch the core of me. What I felt was sad that my daughter had married a man so small he could look at another human being and see only a suit that wasn't nice enough. I thought about my own father, a bricklayer with hands like mine, and how I'd been ashamed of him once, just once, at some function 50 years ago, and carried the shame of it my whole life, because I never got to tell him I was wrong. Sitting there, I mostly hoped Brett would learn what I'd learned before it was too late for him. Then his boss walked in. Here's what I didn't know. Brett's firm was in the middle of closing a major partnership deal, and the company on the other side, the critical partner they desperately needed, was mine. Trelinsky Precision. Brett didn't know his own father-in-law owned the company his firm was bending over backwards to court, because he'd never bothered to learn the first thing about me. The man who walked in, Brett's new boss, was Desmond Okoro. 20 years earlier, Desmond had spent 2 years at my company as a young engineer, and I'd mentored him personally on the shop floor. I remember the day it clicked for him, the third time he rebuilt an assembly that was correct on paper and wrong in reality. He finally stopped arguing with the engine and started listening to it. You don't forget teaching a person to see, and they don't forget learning it. Desmond had arrived early and was checking his coat near the entrance when Brett steered me to that little table. He saw the whole thing, the elbow, the contempt, the shame of it, the old man sitting down alone. And then he recognized me and understood in an instant exactly what kind of man Brett was, not from a rumor, but from watching him humiliate, with his own eyes, a person he assumed was powerless. That's the thing that actually ended Brett. Not that I turned out to be important, that he'd revealed his entire character to the one person whose respect his career depended on. Desmond crossed the room, past Brett's outstretched hand, straight to me. "Mr. Trelinsky," he said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "My God, sir, it is an honor." I stood, "Because you stand up for people who've earned it," and shook his hand. "Desmond, good to see you, son." The room had gone silent. Everyone at the main table watched their important new boss greet the banished old mechanic, like visiting royalty. Brett's face cycled from confusion to a dawning, creeping horror. Desmond didn't shout. He walked back to the main table, took out one of my company's business cards, Amos Trelinsky, founder and chairman, Trelinsky Precision, and set it down in front of Brett. In the total silence, everyone heard him say it plainly. "That man is Amos Trelinsky, founder of the company their entire deal and Brett's promotion depended on. And he's your father-in-law, and I just watched you put him at a table by the kitchen because you were ashamed of him." Brett's face went dead white. I had a clear view of the whole table from my little seat. His parents froze, cycling through confusion into second-hand horror. And Colette? I watched my daughter's face do the most complicated thing. Shock, yes, but underneath it, something I hadn't seen in years. An awakening. She looked at me, sitting alone with my coffee, then back at her white-faced husband, and I could see her recalculating every time she'd looked at her plate, instead of defending her father, realizing she'd been ashamed of the wrong man for years. Brett just sat there, reading the card over and over, as if it might change, understanding all at once the exact dimensions of his own blindness. He'd publicly humiliated, in front of his boss and his in-laws, the one man who held his entire career in his hands. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I promised you the truth, not fantasy. Desmond didn't fire him on the spot. There was no dramatic termination. What happened was quieter and more devastating. The promotion simply never came. Desmond told me later, "Amos, I didn't need to do anything to him. He did it to himself. The moment I saw him do that to you, I knew I could never trust him with power over anyone." The deal between our companies went forward. Business is business, and I wasn't going to hurt 600 employees over one contemptuous young man, but it went forward without Brett anywhere near it. His star simply stopped rising, because everyone who mattered now knew exactly what he was, and in a tight industry, that kind of thing travels. And I think that's fair, because it wasn't one bad night, it was one revealing night. Brett didn't snap under stress. He calmly, deliberately, with plenty of time to think, chose to humiliate someone he believed was powerless, to protect his own image. That tells you exactly how a man treats people when he thinks no one important is watching. I didn't make a single call. I didn't ask for a single consequence. I finished my coffee, slowly, every drop, put money on the table for the kind young waiter, and walked to the main table. I didn't gloat. My daughter was sitting right there. I leaned down, kissed Colette on the top of her head, told her it was good to see her, to call me tomorrow. I nodded to Desmond. I didn't say one word to Brett, I just looked at him, and then I walked out into the night. By the time I got home, my phone had started. Brett calling, Colette calling, Brett again. By morning, over 50 missed calls, most of them his. I hadn't answered a single one. An old mechanic gets to decide who's worth his time. The honest rest of it, Brett and Colette are divorced now. I didn't cause it, but that night cracked something open. She'd spent years being quietly taught that her family, her old grease monkey father, was an embarrassment. That night she watched the whole edifice of Brett's superiority collapse in 90 seconds, watched her father treated with more genuine respect than her status-obsessed husband had ever earned. She called me the next morning, and we talked longer than we had in years. Over the following months, with a strength she found somewhere, she left him. It was her decision. I think that night just gave her back a sense of what she came from. She's living with me now, while she gets back on her feet, and it's the greatest gift of my old age. Her laugh back in a house that went quiet after Junie died. We have coffee together every morning. A real table, side by side, the way it was always supposed to be. Brett's career stalled badly. The shine came off him in the industry. I don't take pleasure in it exactly, but I don't lose sleep over it either. He made his bed. Desmond and I are back in proper touch. Every so often we have dinner at a good table in the middle of the room, and we talk shop. 2 engine men, one old and one not as old. It reminds me the respect that matters comes from people who understand what you actually do, not people impressed by the price of your suit. Here's what I keep coming back to. My son-in-law called me just an old mechanic, and he was right. That's exactly what I am. Big scarred hands, no degree, a plain man who spent his life building engines. What he got catastrophically wrong was the word just. There's no just about mastering a craft. No just about 45 years of building something real with your own 2 hands. Brett spent his whole life chasing the appearance of importance, and he looked straight at a man with actual substance and saw nothing, because he'd been trained to read status off the surface of things. So be careful with the word just. The janitor might have more integrity than the boardroom. The waitress might be putting 3 kids through school alone. The old mechanic might be a master whose name is spoken with reverence by people you'll never be important enough to meet. When you dismiss someone as just anything, you're not describing them, you're describing the smallness of your own vision. I was never just an old mechanic. I was an old mechanic, And it turned out that was more than enough.